Thank you so much for making time to be here. My name is Jonathan Ingram. I'm the Executive Director of Chattanooga Faith Work Culture. We're a nonprofit in town that exists to help equip Christians to be agents of kingdom renewal in the places God calls you to be. Your job, your families, your neighborhoods, and Chattanooga, our community. And so we want to provide opportunities for you to gather with other believers from different churches and industries and backgrounds to come together to begin to imagine what it means for the gospel to impact the work that you've been called to do. And so this is our third of a six-part Lunch and Learn series on reimagining work. And today we're going to have an interesting conversation around this idea of reimagining church and business partnerships. Oftentimes we think about a church ministry budget as being a soup kitchen, a clothing closet, and those are good things to have. But what we want to do today is think, what would it look like for the business leaders and businesses to be a part of how we think about ministering and caring for a city and a place. And so I'm so excited to have our panel. So if you guys can come on up, that'd be great. Hal Bowling is going to be the moderator for our panel today. Hal is the director of Launch Chattanooga. Their office here in this building, and Hal works to provide training and resources for entrepreneurs in our city, and targeted mainly at minority-owned and women-owned businesses to support them as they grow and to build out a diverse workforce in our city. So really thankful to have him as our moderator today. We have Quentin Lawrence on our panel. Quentin is the director of Workforce Development Strategy for the city of Chattanooga. He's worn a lot of different hats in town over the last handful of years at Hope for the Inner City and SunTrust Bank and all kinds of things. Thankful to have Pastor Randy Jacks here with us as well. He's the pastor of Miracle Missionary Baptist Church in East Chattanooga. And we have Matt Busby, who's associate pastor at the Mission Chattanooga. And I'm excited for them to share a little bit about how they think about this topic and what they are implementing already to care for the city of Chattanooga through business as ministry leaders as well. So we're going to have a quick Q&A. They're going to have a conversation up here in front of y'all. At the end, we will have time for Q&A for you all to dialogue and talk back. But my heart in this conversation is that as you're sitting here, you're not in the context of these folks. You all have your own context, what your church looks like, where your ministries are, where your businesses are. And the goal is to awaken your imagination to what it might mean for you and your context to think about how ministry and how caring for the city can include the businesses that are part of your orbit. And so I hope we can do that. So let me pray real quick, and then I'm going to hand it over to Hal to kind of run this conversation. Thank you guys for being here, by the way. Lord, thank you so much for each person in the audience here today, for our panelists, the journey you've taken us on to be here. We thank you for the city you call us to be in, for the industries you call us to be in, and for the churches you call us to be a part of. Lord, I pray that this conversation would be edifying to you and would help us to imagine in new ways what it means to serve you in light of the gifts and resources you've given us. In your name we pray. Amen. Give it up for our panel.
Okay, well, good afternoon, everybody. Really glad you're here, and I hope you had a good lunch. And thanks to our panelists for being here with us, and look forward to a good conversation. So I'm going to ask some questions. If y'all have other things on your minds that you want to, you feel like are relevant, want to take it in a different direction, feel free. But I'm going to ask some questions and then open it up to you all to ask some questions of the panelists as well in a few minutes. But first one, to our topic of reimagining church and business leaders, partnerships. When I guess thinking back to your growing up years and when you were younger, what was your impression, I guess, of church leaders? How did you view them? And the same for business leaders. When you thought about business leaders in your community, kind of what were those things? What were the distinctives of each of those folks that you looked up to?
Can you all hear me okay? Do I need this?
Let's use the mics if we can. Just overkill. And there's recording.
Hello. All right. Well, I grew up in Chattanooga, and the church that I was at, we had a number of older gentlemen who were in leadership, from my pastor to the deacons there, and so I had a very high reverence for those individuals. To be quite honest, I don't think I would be the man I am today without those individuals, because many of them were so much older and so much more mature, but they were very intentional about really sowing into my life. And so I had a very high view of church leadership, even into my years of going into ministry myself. As far as business leaders, I'm not really sure if it was much on my radar. You see things on TV and you kind of have the CEO who's in his tower and kind of controlling things and kind of distant, makes you think of Michael Douglas. And so that was kind of the perception I had until I ended up going to business school myself. I was like, okay, it's possible to, be in Christian ministry in church leadership and also be in leadership in business in some capacity. And so that was pretty much my experience.
Yeah, very good. Thank you. Pastor Jax?
Well, I'm originally from Georgia, but I'm a Tennessee Vols fan all the way. I've lived here for 61 years, so I'm from Chattanooga now. I grew up in a Christian home, and the way I viewed Christian leaders, I always saw them as people working. My dad was before he passed away in 2018. My dad was a pastor. So I'm a PK, and he was a deacon in the church, and they were always working. And so I had a ton of respect for him. And even our pastor, Pastor Williams, he's gone to be with the Lord as well. And he was always working, doing something. So I always viewed them as Christian men who didn't mind getting their hands dirty. I'll just tell you a little short story. I was going to this church. It was Carter Street Baptist Church, right over here on Carter Street. And when the choir sung that song, "There's a leak in this old building," there really was a leak in that old building. When it rained, there were buckets everywhere. And Pastor Williams told us, he was a visionary pastor. He told us that one day there's not going to be anything over here. All these houses are going to be gone. And of course, he was right. There's nothing, no homes or anything over there. So we moved to this area in Avondale. We went over there, and there was this little piece of property, and it was basically just a mud hole. And the water was ankle deep, and man, it was cold like it was this morning. So we were all little kids, and we were walking over there freezing. And Pastor Williams walks out into that mud hole, and he starts to pray. And he's praying. And when we went back the next week, there was no mud hole there. And long story short, they start construction. The contractor runs off with all the money. And we're having a meeting because, we're little kids hiding up under the pews, supposed to be outside. And I hear him say, everybody said, "Pastor, what are we going to do?" He says, "I'm going to work." He puts on his little apron with his nails and hammer, and the men of that church built that church, finished it. So I always I always saw people in the church as men and women who were not afraid to get their hands dirty. My father was a business owner. My uncle had a small business. Pastor Williams had a small business. So I just always kind of saw those men as, in the way my dad ran his business, my uncle and Pastor Williams, as Christian men in business who were working. And I grew up and started a little business. My dad taught us all how to work. So I've been working since I was 5 years old. So I'm not afraid to work, and more about that later. All right.
Just real briefly, I grew up in a Pentecostal tradition, and I don't think the way you stated the question ever crossed my mind, right? Like, what do you think about business leaders and churches? Because I think that the tradition I grew up in was very dualistic. There was work on Monday through Friday, and then there was church, and those worlds only crossed in that you're supposed to give a tithe to the church. It was kept kind of separate. So I don't know that I had much imagination for business leaders in the church when growing up in the tradition I did.
Yeah, that's similar for me. That's the same kind of situation for me growing up. But I do think that dualism is something that really impacts us as a community, and the more that can be done away with, the more that I think we and folks in churches can see that everything matters, our community matters, and every part of it, and it matters it matters to us as people and residents of the community. It matters to God. And so, as breaking those down is super important. But yeah, that's really interesting just to hear about your own perspectives on it. Can you tell us, maybe to start with you, on the end there, Matt, if you don't mind. Can you tell us about your church and where you're located, what sort of emphases you have at your church?
Yeah. So I'm part of Mission Chattanooga. I'm an associate pastor there. I've been there since 2010 when it was planted. So you want me to go into kind of the camp house piece of this?
Yeah,
Okay. So when the church was planted back in 2010, the question was how do we become part of the life of the neighborhood? And Chris Sorensen, the founding pastor, really did want to move into a building in downtown that didn't sit empty 6 days a week, but throughout the week was part of the life of the neighborhood. So in addition to planting the church, which is Mission Chattanooga, we started the camp house. And originally, the camp house was just meant to be the name of the building, and it stood for Coffee, Art, Music, Prayer. I think it was an acronym because we're Christians, and so we do cheesy things like create acronyms all the time. But when the business that was actually supposed to own the coffee bar in there, which we really saw as the central piece to be a third space that's investing and inviting people in throughout the week, they backed out at the last minute. And so the church ended up moving forward and starting the coffee shop anyways and just owning it. And so we're 12 years old. For 10 of those years, we were under our nonprofit tax ID. We had a for-profit entity, so we were doing business as the mission was doing business as the camp house, and yeah, we did that for 10 years in that model. It's changed a little bit in our new location, which you mentioned. We're now on 12th Street in a neighborhood called Onion Bottom, which if you don't know where that is, if you just imagine the hole that exists between MLK and Southside, you can get there through Central, you get there by Market, all that area right in the middle around the community kitchen, that's where we're a block from the community kitchen right now. And so moving there, we, instead of owning the business, we went back to that original model, and we've actually leased out our kitchen, leased out our coffee bar, and we have a couple different businesses there, Party Bites, Plant Candy Collective, Mr. Beast Burger. They do a lot of stuff. Green Bean Coffee Company.
Yeah, and that's really different than the way it was set up before in your other locations, right?
Yeah, and I think for us it's because we've just been pretty responsive to how the Lord has grown our church, our faith community, because it used to be, there's 100 of us, there's 200 of us. We could operate in one room, and so historically we've only had one big space that has been set up as a coffee shop and venue that we then flip on Saturday nights into a church space to worship in. So the difference between us and like maybe planting in a school is just that we happen to own the space. We still prioritize the public-facing aspect of what we were, but we flip it. In this location, the church has grown so much. We have about 120 kids on Sundays. They're active in our kids ministry. At this point, we're at a position in our church life where we have to take discipleship seriously. And so we've actually separated out those spaces in a way we never have before. But we kept all those public-facing entities on the street to animate the street, to bring life to the street in a part of our city that really doesn't have much commercial activity like that going on.
Let me just ask you a couple follow-up questions on that, just to go back to the previous question. How has your church encouraged people to care about things like a coffee shop or on the streets or those kind of things, whereas a lot of churches wouldn't see maybe the value in that kind of thing? How's that organically happen, and how do you encourage that?
So that really is a massive theological question that could take the entire hour to answer.
Don't do that. But
I don't want to do that.
Is there a short version you can give us?
Yeah,
or just anything that's like that you do to kind of nurture that, I guess.
Yeah.
Because I see that as a really unique thing.
Okay, really briefly, it's taken the theology of creation, incarnation, and eschatology really literally as much as we can. In other words, if you read Genesis 1, why did God create us? He created us to bring order to creation, meaning human culture and business is absolutely what God made us to do, right? So it's part of who we are. And we really strive for our people to understand that, especially in some of our membership classes. Number two, the incarnation. God became human, right, as a carpenter. And we are made to be little Christ. We are made to enter into the world and incarnate the presence of Christ wherever we are. And a lot of us spend most of our lives working, right? And then third, we don't believe the world's going to burn up at the end of time. When Jesus comes back, he's going to renew the earth, renew the world, and enjoy human making and human culture with us, right? Like wine is human culture. It's not something God created, right? It's a human thing that we're going to enjoy forever. Does that answer your question? It's very high level. I don't know.
Yeah, no, it is. It is. I think just any insights. It does partly, practically, I guess, folks in the church get to see how you work out some of those beliefs, and those are some of the ways that you do it with the coffee shop, with businesses over there.
Yeah, historically, it really has been opening our space to steward the common good of Chattanooga in culture, and being really loose about what that means, right? So for us historically, that's been opening our stage to anybody who has something to offer and contribute to our city. And I would literally work with anybody once, which means there's a lot of like cringy things that would happen on our stage on a Saturday night before we had church on Sunday, right? But out of respect for the people in our community, we would always work with somebody once. And afterwards, I would say, yeah, that's probably not appropriate for us, but this other venue might be really good for you. Does that make sense?
Yeah.
Thanks, brother. I got to follow that. Amen. I almost hollered out, preached a couple of times there. But I pastor the Miracle Missionary Baptist Church. We're in East Chattanooga area, right across from the old Harriet Tubman site. I've been there for 14 years. We had our annual meeting last week, so I'm in for another year. So I've been there for 14 years this April. And I have a big vision for things I believe the Lord wants us to do. I just really need a lot of help to get it done. But one of the things I've done, just to kind of start out small. We don't have a business in our church. I do have a business, and from my business, some other business have spun off from my business. But one of the things I've tried to do is what I call the Reach Our Street initiative. We know every person on our street. It's probably about 20 houses or something. But I know every person on that street. I know their names, even though I forget them sometimes, but I know their names, and they don't forget my name. So I know every person. I know every child, I know the lady, the second house from our church has 2 boys and 1 girl. I know all the kids on our street. So I'm trying to just reach out to the people on our street to get to know those people, to let them know what the church has to offer. And one of the ways I'm big on building, relationships. I tell our church all the time, those days of, you go knock on my door and, come in my house and tell me about Jesus. I tell them, if you got a truckload of Bibles, and if I don't know you, you're not getting in my house, okay? So, but if I build a relationship with you where I know your name, you know me, then you know what, it opens the door for me to tell you about Christ. So one of the things that I've done, really wasn't planning to do it, but we go to the neighbors and cut their grass for free. And but they got to do something for us. We'll cut your grass, but will you let these people just talk to you for a few moments? And when you are done, you don't want to talk anymore, we'll leave. And most of the time, they're still there an hour later, And so some people have started to come to our church. Just a little story. We had a lady that moved into the neighborhood recently. I didn't really know her. One of the guys was cutting her grass. If you go up Ruby Street where our church is, we own you see all those vacant lots, we own all of those vacant lots. My vision is for those lots not to be vacant, but to have affordable housing on them. But, and I'm praying that that's not way in the future. But anyway, long story short, so we're out cutting grass. I'm out there doing it too. I cut grass. I cut the church's grass. I'll fix the church's bus. I'll do the church's plumbing. And no, I'm not coming to your house, okay? But I do a lot of different things. I'm just try to be a servant. I'll sweep the floor or whatever I have to do. But we're out cutting grass, and she says to me, comes out and says, "Will y'all cut my grass?" And I'm going like, y'all, it was just me. And I said, sure, I'll cut it. And I cut it and, made it look really nice. And we do prayer walks, and I took one of our little door hangers. She left, and I hung it on her door, and I just wrote on there, hey, Pastor Jack's your friendly neighborhood grass cutter. Well, guess what? She was at church next Sunday. So that's just, things that that I try to do. And like I said, I have a huge vision for the church. I told my wife the other day, I said, I dreamed that, the Lord was telling me that our ministry had gotten so big that we had to have church every day. So we have a big God, and we can't limit him. So I think that God can turn that little church around, use it for his glory, and we can be involved in ministry every single day. So.
That's great. Thanks for mentioning that. The lawn service, let me just ask you a follow-up question to that too, because I know you use that in, it's been running for a long time, but can you talk a little bit about the side of it that you use to help create jobs as well?
Okay. Well, when I started the lawn business, me and two other guys, and I'm the only one left. They're all dead. We called ourselves R&R Multi-Services because we would do anything. And so after, they all were off the scene, I kind of flipped it a little bit and just started basically just cutting grass was what I started, just cutting grass. And what I do is I will find guys, girls too if they want to work, I don't care, they can't get jobs anywhere, that have felonies on their record, and they really want. Some people really do want to work, and they just can't find work. So I'll find them. Usually I'll find one guy and he'll tell me about 10. I can't employ 10, but what I do is I partner with other guys that have lawn service business, and we will use all of those guys. They'll have a day or two they work with me, and a day or two they work with other people. It's kind of a little, a little circle. And I've had some really great success stories. I had a guy that was working for me. Later on, got his records straightened out, got a job driving a truck, and last time I talked to him, he was making well over $100,000 a year. I said, bro, you got me beat. Will you hire me? And I've had some that were not so successful. One of the guys who worked for me now, he's in jail right now for something that he didn't have to do. Going in Walmart stealing, he didn't have to do it. He had money in his pocket, didn't have to. So, it's kind of up and down, but, we just keep pressing, and a lot of those guys have, some of them give their life to Christ. Some of them, reject him, but I still keep planting the seed every time I get a chance, and, I'm still the boss, so, certain things you're not gonna do in my truck, you're not gonna drink while you're working with me, you may drink with that other guy, you're not gonna do it with me, you're not gonna smoke in my customers' yards, you're gonna be respectful, you're not gonna be looking at these women and acting crazy, you're gonna do the right thing. And I do that by telling them, but I also do it by showing them. So.
Thank you very much.
And I'm long-winded, so check me out on YouTube. I'm long-winded. I preach about 45 minutes. So.
Okay, over to you, Quinton Lawrence. In your role, I know it's relatively new for you. Your role as head of workforce development at the city. How do you envision church as playing a role in your efforts? And also, how does your own theology shape your philosophy on the work you do?
Sure, well, maybe I'll start with the end first. I believe that God ordains and blesses work. And so just even from that perspective, whether serving in government or even when I was in banking, just really seeing that any work that I did, being ministry to the Lord. And so in my role with the city, I just see it as an opportunity to really lay a platform out for the believing community to actually take a healthy theology of work and present that to individuals who truly need it. And so in my role, and I was talking with a gentleman at my table about this, a lot of it is focused on actual development. It's not just placing someone in a job just so that they can say that I'm working, but how are people actually truly being developed from a skill standpoint, tangible skills, soft skills, all of those things. And so for the church, in my mind, I see the church being an advisor, a strategic advisor for how a person's mindset should be when it comes to approaching work. First and foremost, we have the gospel, which redeems all things, including work, right? And so where I see the church coming in, they can be that advisor to actually speak to individuals about the importance of work, why we were created to work, how it is not only to bless our families, but to provide flourishing for the communities that we're in. Those are the types of things that I hope to partner with the church on, because I have no problem saying that myself, but of course, being in government, sometimes it's easier to have your brothers and sisters there to say that, right? And so my hope is that in the work that we're doing, that there'll be a group of churches and Christian organizations that can serve as advisors when it comes to our workforce development strategy, and allowing those churches and those organizations to be creative and to think about what they can do to help in that effort. I know it gets a little tricky sometimes when it comes to churches and government, and some get a little leery about working with government, but the fact of the matter is God has placed his people in every type of sphere of work, including government. And so hopefully the platform that I have can be utilized to open up some of those opportunities for churches to do some creative and innovative things like what these brothers are doing. We have a budgeting for outcomes process every year, and there are plenty of Christian organizations and even churches that have taken advantage of that, and even more so this year because they've actually given out multi-year funding. And so if there are ideals around workforce development, I would love to have those conversations. I would love for those that are at the table as advisors to actually bring ideals, and let's see how we can help you to tap into that process and maybe some of those resources. So I think that's kind of where my mindset is, and hopefully get to talk with some of you afterwards too.
Just knowing, just a follow-up question for you, but just knowing your background, you've been involved in ministry organizations, you've been involved in business organizations, banking industry, and now you work with city government. I mean, and from a kind of a perspective of business partnerships, business and church partnerships, do you have any insights from your own work experience related to that, related to what you've done that you can share?
So businesses and churches working together in particular? I think there are some examples, and that's the thing. One thing I found out about businesses, because even working in banking, I worked with a number of entrepreneurs and businesses. You have a lot of people that aren't there to toot their own horn, and so sometimes you don't always see the good that they're doing in partnership with churches. Sometimes that's your basic just funding different initiatives that churches are trying to push through with maybe community development or things of that nature. And then sometimes there are those partnerships where churches, where I've seen where churches have had individuals that they've tried to work with through their benevolence ministry, but then they partner them with a business that maybe has an employment need. And so one thing that we always advocated for when I was in nonprofit economic development work was really taking a look at the assets within your church and in your community, and thinking through what giftings has God put there in that church and in that community so that they can actually be unleashed to do the work, whatever that is that God has called them to do. And so some of those partnerships have been helpful with that, where, again, you may have a business owner that's right there in the church who, they may not be serving in children's ministry, they may not be serving in some of the traditional roles, because they're spending 8 to 10, maybe sometimes 12 hours working at their work, which God has called them to. But they're in a position where they may have some deeper influence and impact because of the position they're in than maybe some pastors do, because they're spending more time with individuals who are spending hours upon hours at work. And so those type of partnerships I've seen in different locales, not just here in the city, but in other cities. And so it doesn't have to necessarily be that model. But again, my hope would be that even through this forum that we have here, and even through other interactions, that churches and other organizations will feel free and feel like they have the right to tap into the resources that the government has to help them with some of the things they want to do, and particularly around investing in people so that they can actually have gainful employment, living wage employment, so that they can be a blessing to the community also.
Thank you. So, and you mentioned it too, there, Quentin, but are there other creative ways churches are thinking about business and ministry that you've heard about, and anything else that you're seeing in our community that is a good example of those kind of partnerships?
Certainly. Well, I think what these two brothers have done has been really instrumental. There's a ministry I know of in Indiana. I had a good friend of mine who was a part of a ministry that actually started a custom furniture shop. They own like this massive warehouse space where they take individuals who, much like yourself, who may be down on their luck, have some issues with their criminal background, who could not find employment. And they take those individuals in there, they train them hands-on on how to create these beautiful furniture pieces. And not only are they getting valuable technical work skills and learning how to work in relationship with other people, but they're also hearing the gospel. And not just hearing it, they're seeing it, as you said, they're seeing it at work in the way that work culture operates. It's not just where we talk about Christ, but you're going to get us our bottom line. No, you're actually engaged in Christian community that has a financial goal, but there's a greater goal of you developing more into the image of Jesus Christ. And so that's a really good one. So I think there are churches that have started their own businesses that are very intentional about that holistic relationship piece. And then again, there are some churches that I know of that have partnered with businesses to actually help with their benevolence, so that it's not just where, again, you maybe have some of the same people that are looking for assistance, which is fine, but how do we get people to a place of sustainability? And so partnering with local businesses to figure out how can we not only help people when they're most in need, but as we're helping them, how can we position them so that they can get employment that's going to empower them to be able to take the reins of their own lives and be able to move forward and actually be able to help other people in that same vein.
All right. Reverend Busby and Reverend Jacks, either of y'all have insight on that question, same question?
So yeah, say the question again.
Basically, wondering about other creative ways that churches are thinking about business and ministry that you've heard about. Any examples of partnerships that are happening in the city that you've heard about, know about?
Whatever.
Yeah, go for it.
I can't wait to get back to church Sunday. I got two guys that preach longer than me. One of the things we're doing, we kind of got into the real estate business. I mentioned earlier about, my vision is to have some, what I believe is truly affordable housing on those lots. And, on our little street, the average rent is $1,200 a month. And we only own one house right now, and we rented it for 13 years for $650. 3 bedrooms, 2 baths, hardwood floors. I would live there, I promise you. It is nice level yard, all that stuff. So what we're trying to do is make housing affordable. It just breaks my heart when I see this lady, a single mother with 3 kids, and she's paying $1,200 a month for rent. I don't know how she does it, but she does. And our house right now rents for $895. We had to spend about $18,000 fixing it after our last person moved out, but that's another story. But we're going to get our money back, and the person living there is going to be surprised probably in the next year or so that their rent's going to drop from $895 to $800 or $750 or something like that. So I want to get some more affordable housing that people will want to live in, bring families, be able to help families, that are struggling, who may not qualify for Section 8, and they may be kind of on the borderline. I can't get Section 8, but I'm really having a hard time, and I want to be able to help those people. So if there's anybody out there with 1.5 million, just come see me afterwards.
The most creative thing that I'm probably excited about right now within Chattanooga is the work of Kingdom Partners, which is an association of different churches coming together specifically for real felt needs that contribute to the common good. And the most exciting one that has to do with this room, as far as church and business partnership, would be the efforts around affordable housing, of literally taking churches who have vacant property and bringing in developers who can develop that property to meet a need in our community. So that's a really exciting one. As far as a high level, as especially if you're a business person here, to take back to your church, what I really think would be super helpful is to, so there's a parish model of ministry, right? Parish model means you look it's your spiritual responsibility to care for the geographic area in which you're located. Is to begin to think about the common good for the geographic area you're located in, and not just spiritual goods and services, right? That's a huge part of who we are as a church. But what does it mean to flourish? Flourishing is more than just the spiritual aspect of your life. It's more than just where you're going to go when you die, right? It's about right now. And so what does that mean for your church to play an active role in the common good of the parish, of the geographic area in which you're located? And I think it's that kind of high-level questioning that can lead to these sort of partnerships for affordable housing, or doing the asset analysis. I don't remember who mentioned that, to see how your church can be involved in workforce development, just because of the incredible kind of people you have within your church. And I want to say this too, if you guys are involved in a church, churches are becoming some of the last sort of diverse civic organizations left, right? As we continue to move around all the time, people are getting less and less and less involved in civic organizations. And so churches tend to be now the most diverse, both demographically, in terms of age, in terms of profession, associations of people within our communities. And so your churches tend to be some of the best networking places in the entire community. And so those asset maps of what you have in your church is becoming more and more and more valuable to the common good of your cities. So I think that's really interesting.
Thank you.
Yeah. And you mentioned Kingdom Partners, and I've known Oliver Richmond for quite some time now, and I think that's an excellent example of where that partnership comes in. And it's like a confederation of churches from every stripe that are trying to figure out ways to do good in their community. And so, for instance, with what they're doing now, that's a partnership with the city. They received $2.3 million from the city of Chattanooga to address affordable housing issues. But it started with a few churches, and then it grew to more churches, and they're like, okay, well, how much good can we do together? And now here we are. But like you said, also to taking good assessment of what assets are there in those churches. So there are individuals, not just the pastors, but people within those churches who have been leveraged, their expertise, their background, their giftings as God has called them to be a part of that work. So thanks for bringing up that example.
Hal, I'd love to turn this on you actually really quick. You've been leading this incubating organization for a long time, starting a lot of businesses. How can churches be more involved in what you're doing, besides just buying a table at your annual banquet, which we should all be doing anyways? What are some ways that churches can be involved in sort of your organization?
Well, I was going to come back to this question too, because in my experience over the last 11 years with Launch, I've had a very difficult time connecting with churches around the work we're doing. And so I think there's a box that looks like what a church is supposed to be involved in, it's supposed to be doing, and stuff that, and I think this gets right to the dualism question. I think it's the stuff that they believe God cares about, and unfortunately it leaves out a lot of things that are really important, I think, to God and to our community and to people in our community. And so, it hasn't been easy. Honestly, it's been much harder than I thought it would be to connect our work at Launch with the things that churches in general. Now we have some that are very excited about what we're doing, but then out there also there are just tons of things going on. With that churches are getting involved in that maybe they haven't before, or ways in which they're they're being creative. So I've sort of seen both sides of it. But the last question I had for you all before we turn it over to the audience for any questions they have is just what advice you would give to church leaders and business leaders on ways that they can creatively think about these relationships, partnerships, and really working together to care for the community, serve the community better.
Okay, I think if you're a business leader in the church, it would be great for you to set up coffee with your pastor and just say, hey, I want to give you insight into what I do every day, and I'd love to hear how I can reflect Christ more in what I'm doing. And again, don't let them get by with spiritual answers, like seriously embodied answers. Like, how do I love my neighbor better within what I'm doing? And I think. And then for pastors, I think, again, it's part of that asset mapping within your church is having those coffees with people in your church and learning what their businesses are, what it is they're involved in on a daily basis, and like literally writing it down and making mental notes where you can connect people, right? I think that one of the sort of, I know from my own job as director of the camp house, whenever we moved to MLK, I went from being somebody who managed a business to being just a glorified networker. Like that was probably 50% of my job was just networking at that point. And I think networking is an incredibly important soft skill that pastors can be pretty good at actually, for the sake of the common good. So I would say that. And then I think, and the other answer I gave too is to think about what does it mean? What does flourishing mean in the geographic area in which you're located, beyond just spiritual goods and services?
Anybody else?
What he said.
Yeah. Yeah, I think when it comes to just everyday work outside of just the traditional, I guess, liturgical, machinations, if I could say it that way, when you do that asset mapping, making sure that just like we would ordain and lay hands on someone who is called to the role of an elder or a deacon, people go out day after day, grinding it out, in the workforce. And so setting up those times where those individuals are recognized, maybe industry sectors, and saying, hey, let's pray over you. Let's recognize that the work that you're doing is also ordained of God, and setting that time aside. I think for me it's been unique because I've served in formal ministry as an elder, ordained, all of that, but I've also worked outside of the church, and I've seen where there's kind of that, that secular versus sacred, and the thing is Christ unites all of that together. And so I think setting up that space where people's work is recognized as spiritual work and not just that other stuff outside of church is important. And again, I go back to it, and like Matt said, really just understanding the congregation and having that time to genuinely get to understand what people do and finding out not just how much they maybe make so that you can figure out how to boost the offering, but to really take interest in what they do, because you just never know what blessing may come out of that person being fully known like that. They spend more time on their job than they do at church. Sometimes more time on their job than they do with their families. And so I think church leaders can definitely invest a little more in those opportunities and give people that permission, not that they don't already have it, but verbally give them permission to do ministry where God has planted them, and that person have that sense of fulfillment and not feel like they're not doing spiritual work if they're not in the youth ministry or doing some other ministry that oftentimes is highlighted. Not that that's not important, but I think that space has to be provided.
Great, thank you. Well, let's open it up for questions that you have for these guys. Anybody? Anybody have something they'd like to ask? All right. Yep.
You would mention IO psychology, so we share a common interest in that area. If you would say it one more time, just in a sentence, what you said, just so I can make sure I got it.
So tips for how to connect and to compel non-faith-based organizations to have the desire to invest in their local community.
Sure. I think in the seat that I sit in, I think one of the things that I've tried to promote with the mayor's office and with other directors at the city is to understand that we're not in a position to really deal with the behavioral side of why people do or don't do certain things, especially when it comes to work. There are all kinds of professionals out there that do that, but when we think about holistic well-being, and that's really kind of a key term that's out there when you talk about people and work, just that well-being piece, that the church is a vital part of that. People's deep-seated beliefs about how they view the world, what they think about when it comes to work, that's within the realm of the sacred. And so for the work that I do, it's extremely important, and I've made that clear even, like I said, to Mayor Kelly and to others, that I'm very intentional about engaging the church because they're going to be able to deal with issues and answer questions that we cannot, given our resources. You know, we may be able to throw money at things and convene people together, but when people leave a program and they have to deal with real life and they're confronted with life's challenges and issues, we're not there, but the church is. And so it's going to be entities like the church and Christian organizations that are going to be able to really speak to use a term that we're all familiar with, that inner person, so that as we're doing the work that we're doing, that those individuals are providing those deeper services so that people can actually maintain employment. They have the right mindset about how they approach maybe their boss or their coworker. So that's where I come from.
Got a burning one? We got another question.
Yeah, go for it.
Go ahead and keep that.
I'm just not sure I have any strategies so much as to say, the answer is obviously highly contingent on how big this company is, right? Like, because the more abstract the company, the harder that is. But I think it is if you're an employee, it should be your responsibility to know the values of that company, whatever those stated values are, and find opportunities to say, hey, we say we care about this. What if we volunteered at Grateful this year, right? And to push forward that way. But yeah.
Great, thanks. Okay, in the back there.
Well, just thought as I listened to all you talk about what you're doing, and I applaud you for the good work you're doing. And, you know, I do think small business people are like the absolute heroes of America.
Mm-hmm.
And they take a lot of risk to invest their whole lives, as you described, in doing these things.
You know that.
In the end, small business people, large business people, they got to make a profit,
Mm-hmm.
right? Churches aren't for profit. So sometimes there can be a little tension in how do you bring those two worlds together, you know, in a symbiotic fashion. Again, you have some great ideas how to do that. So I almost have a little rabbit twist to this discussion. You know, what about the idea as a member of our civic government, if, for example, the government were to build a civic center in an underserved area and then turn it over to the church. Church doesn't have the money to build it, but the church has the attitude and perhaps people to run it. And so, because I can see the government and churches have the same goal. You want people to have vibrant, fulfilled, complete lives.
Yeah.
So those come together, and then, you know, does that give you some kind of church state, all that kind of chatter that goes on? So just kind of a little twist.
Yeah, that's an interesting thought. I mean, it does get to some of that, even when I've been earlier, just in terms of like where churches are involved and how far out of their comfort zones they get, in the community. So I think to your point, that is, that something like that could accomplish.
Depends on the government, I think. I think you could probably find churches who's willing to say, hey, we put a center in our part of town. We'll bring people to man it and run it and set programs up and to provide the spiritual flavor that we would want, as opposed to just a straight up, okay, a soccer program.
Right. That's good. We're almost out of time.
So I would almost push back to say I think it's actually easier for businesses to work with churches in doing what you're describing than it would be for churches to work with government, because of the limitations and liabilities the government has. And so again, that's essentially what we're doing as a church right now. Is we want to provide a third space within this neighborhood that we're trying to support the common good, and so we've leased our space to a business. Right, and so we are actively in partnership with them because we're not. Like you just said, we're a church. Our goal is not making a profit, so we're not charging them market rates on a lease. We're charging it's a competitive rate, and it's one that actually protects us, but also is actually investing in their business. Right, and so that's where I think it might be easier actually for churches and businesses, small businesses, to work together than it would be for the scenario you laid out about a church running. Because I can tell you, a church don't have no budget to run a civic center, right? Like that's a lot, but yeah.
Well, I've seen the model before. That's why I bring it up.
Oh, I would actually be very interested in reading about that.
It was a very interesting event.
Yeah.
And I'd be interested in seeing that example also. Maybe not. This isn't a church, but I know that some of the issues that we had with trying to find housing for some of our homeless population here in the city got pretty messy on 11th Street. And so, there's a homeless encampment now. I believe it's 12th and Peoples, if I'm not mistaken. And I forget the name of the nonprofit that kind of.
Right here. Yeah.
Okay.
Help right now.
Right, but I mean that's one example of how city and a nonprofit work together to come up with a solution. And I do know, and again, this isn't me trying to sell the agenda of the mayor, but this is the honest to God's truth, though. One of the things that he's said time and time again is where he sees where the church and government should actually be able to work together to solve some of these problems. Pretty idealistic mayor, open to hearing new things, and I mean that in a good way. And so I would welcome, seeing some of those examples, but also just with that example about the homeless encampment and the partnership with the nonprofit, or even just the fact that we have a budgeting for outcomes process that helps to provide funding to churches that are trying to address issues in the community, and the fact that millions of dollars have been put out there for some of these churches or Christian organizations to take up some of this work, I think speaks to that. So again, I'm open to exploring. I'm sure that Mayor Kelly is also.
Thank you. Well, unfortunately, we're out of time. I'm sorry to cut it short. I know that I think all three of the panelists will stick around here for a few minutes. If you have other questions that you didn't get to ask, come talk to them afterwards. And Jonathan, I'll turn it back over to you. Thank you